One of the lines that has become clear to me in his performance last night is 40 Acres and a Mule. And that line is particularly potent for many Black Americans. And it happens to be a line that I remember from my education growing up in grade school in the Bronx. And I vaguely remember what it was about. It was something that was promised enslaved people. I can't remember whether I was told it was before or after emancipation, but it had to do with the Civil War. And I've since had my memory refreshed. And it was something that the federal government promised enslaved people that they would get, and it would help them get a head start. But as with many promises given to Native Americans, they didn't come through. And I never really equated 40 acres and a mule because it was not something that really ever touched my life. But in thinking about it this morning, I never really equated it with something else that was very important to American life, which was the Homestead Act. Now, if you don't recall the Homestead Act, for some reason, there's a lot of American history that was that really stayed with me. And the Homestead Act was an act that the federal government felt was extremely important because they wanted to populate the Midwestern part of our country, the prairie. And so they offered 160 acres free and clear to people who would farm the land, ranch the land. I guess it was really only good for farming, but they would give free and clear 160 acres to people, and they had mapped out a huge swath of prairie land. And it was white people who took that land, and that's how a lot of our Midwest cities came into being. And they didn't rescind that promise. They gave 160 acres to people free and clear, and all they had to do was stake it out. And this may be apocryphal, but I seem to remember in class hearing how there was a date and they had people lining up and they set off a bell and you could just go and stake out your plot of land and it was yours and you could farm it. And that was the beginning of generational wealth for a lot of white people. A lot of these people came from Germany and Middle European countries, and they got a stake in this country. And here we have enslaved people who were brought over against their will and finally released from bondage and promised for their servitude they would be given 40 acres and a mule, and a mule. And they got nothing. And they had to start from scratch. Just a thought. Think about that. Think about how you'd feel if that promise was made to you and then you were just blown off. Okay, that's it. See you next time.
A lot of folks have heard this phrase, right? 40 acres and a mule. As you say, a lot of people thought, okay, this just never happened. And your reporting is called 40 acres and a lie. What's the truth behind this program? What do people not know?
What people don't know is that it wasn't just a promise that was broken. People were received land titles. We found more than 1,250 people who got land titles, men and women. They picked out their plots of land, mostly on the plantations where they were enslaved. Actually, not everyone got 40 acres, which is another misconception. It was up to 40 acres. And then people were living there. They were planting their crops. They were selling them in Savannah. Some of them formed governments, elected a sheriff. They were living their lives, and they lived there for up to a year and a half before they were kicked off.
How did they get kicked off the land that the government gave them?
Basically, because Lincoln was assassinated. I mean, they had promised this land. They gave land titles. The government said, this is yours. you deserve it, you're going to keep it. But Congress needed to make those titles permanent. They had a majority in Congress who were willing to do it, but Andrew Johnson, he was the vice president, he was a white supremacist. He sided with the planters who wanted their land back, and he vetoed every effort to make those land titles permanent.
You did a little more research to talk about the value of the land. This is an important part of your reporting here. 1 4-acre lot that you identified in Jacksonville, Florida, based on a sale last year, that it would today 40 acres would be worth $2.5 million there. It's not just the land that was lost here in your reporting. Tell me about what else you found.
Yeah, well, just that generational wealth that wasn't passed on. You know, this 40 acres land was all the coast. It's like expensive coastal real estate. We found gated communities, golf courses, and restaurants, incredibly valuable lands. This is wealth that was not passed on, and that's kind of what we're trying to show is the impact. This is not a history lesson only. It's the impact on people who are alive today.
Copyright disclaimer under Section 107 of the Copyright Act 1976, allowance is made for fair use for purposes such as criticism, comment, news reporting, teaching, scholarship, and research. Fair use